the water. That's all. The water. That's all. The water. That's all.
Hello everybody, my name's DC Rockwell and this is Automate All the Things. Tonight we have Louis Montes on the show. He's a programmer from Arizona who is also the creator of a tool called PageNodes, which we haven't done a lot of talking in the past about flow-based programming, but tonight's going to be a lot about that. It's going to be about what is flow-based programming in the first place, what is it good for, what kind of applications, what kind of limitations do they have versus other programming techniques, and who's using it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get everybody in here. Let's try out our new layout, which I spent too much time getting up and running before the show, but all right. Elio, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep. And Louis?
Awesome.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Excellent.
Yep. Oh, sweet.
Okay, so let's make sure that this is all working. So, first off, Louis, tell us a little bit about you and your background. You do a lot of stuff, and I'd probably have to give you way too big of an intro, so I'm going to let you do it.
Okay, sure. So, Louis Montes, I run a consultancy called IceDev here in Phoenix. We do a lot of IoT contracts. We do a lot of Node.js backend, React front end, progressive web apps. Mostly what we enjoy, though, is the IoT aspect of things, connecting things. And we've managed to carve out a niche with people that need IoT type projects built.
That's awesome. Can you? We've talked only a little bit about IoT in the first place, so I guess that would be sort of a good place to start before we go into the flow-based programming. Can you just tell us? I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and say, well, isn't the internet full of things already?
Absolutely. It is 100% marketing, that title. I won't pretend it's anything else. I've over the years tried to find interesting ways of building applications that are bidirectional, that have server push to send messages, just more rich applications than what we used to do. And it's usually been web-based things. So over the years, we've had all kinds of hacks. The only thing that's really different that makes IoT legitimate is really just the evolution of a few aspects over the last few years. One is everybody has a cell phone. Great. We all have a connection out there. We also have platforms like Arduino and Raspberry Pi and all of these hobbyist platforms we could actually build projects on top of and connect those things up. I'd say the third component of this is just the ubiquity of protocols that allow synchronous communication. There's a very popular one called MQTT, which most IoT shops are using, message queue telemetry transport, I think, but a standard way of communicating. So we have, established connection, TCP connection or something like that, but we have a standard way of sort of publishing and subscribing to topics. And so that's one. There's also, web sockets. There's just a lot of things that have sort of evolved over the years that make this a real thing that we can build. We can actually have a toothbrush connected to a refrigerator or whatever.
So it sounds like the big innovation has been in there's been technological advances that allow it so that way we have the ability for things like a toothbrush or a webcam or something small to be able to connect in a meaningful way to other kinds of web apps.
Right, and it's reasonably inexpensive to send data to the cloud now, right? So you can have these things connected through the Wi-Fi in your house, through through a 3G module or something like that, and they're pushing out data. Not only are they pushing out sensor data, it's pretty easy to have the cloud or some logic somewhere actuate one of these things, turn a servo, turn on a motor, a light, an LED, an RGB light, things
Right.
like that. So yeah, it's that this stuff, not no one single piece of this is new, um, but the ability to quickly put these things together is relatively recent.
Right on. And so because when I think of Internet of Things, I think I have a very limited scope of what those things would be because
Right.
I've not really jumped into it. I know of things like, for instance, beacons, which
Mm-hmm.
are these they broadcast out a URL from
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are, right? And certain kinds of devices pick up on those beacons and use them. Other things are, actual webcams. So maybe you want your webcam to be viewable from your app or something like that. Really, is it real when we say IoT or Internet of Things? Are we really talking about small devices being attached to the internet and a marketing term around? It's really the marketing buzz around the fact that we can attach these small devices to the internet, or are there large devices too?
So as a consultant, I am willing to. This is totally shameless here. Yes, all of those things, right? Somebody wants to connect something to the internet, and we want to use one of these newer transports, and make things reliable, or maybe built out some prototype, whatever. I consider all that IoT. The same way. So a very popular service, if this then that. That might take there's no hardware, there's no pushing something directly down into your house necessarily, but it could just be because I have a tweet coming in, I want to make that a Facebook post, or because some other event happens out on the internet, I want to connect it to something else. We're still sort of calling that IoT as well. It's routing messages bidirectionally. To me, the biggest takeaway here is that it isn't polling, it isn't something asking for information, it's information being pushed out to the edge, right? To either your cell phone, your refrigerator, your whatever. Um,
Right.
but
So
that two-way communication is more than just advice asking for something. It's an event pushing something down as well.
right. So these are data generating devices, and they're
Right.
pushing that data out over these new
Right.
protocols that make it efficient. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
is it safe to say, or is it fair to say that before these protocols were out, that it was just too tedious for us to think of doing this,
We
or
we were doing it, but there was a lot of a lot more. There was a much bigger struggle to get something as simple as I want to push a message from some third party out there on the internet service to something inside of my house behind my firewall. Right. But if
right,
when the thing in my house boots up and it establishes a connection out to this service and creates a bidirectional channel like a stateful socket, then we can have messages going in both directions.
right.
And that's been possible using different all different types of ways of communicating. But now it's pretty straightforward to do this sort of thing now.
Well, and of course, I'm going to take Elio's approach on this one and just say, a device that I could hook up at home that circumvents my firewall for me. What could possibly go wrong, right? So there's also, I would presume, a very large security aspect to this
Absolutely.
because, like, with this power comes a huge responsibility to
Oh
not
yeah.
allow it to get, say, turned into a Mirai botnet or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of the things that just apply to the web in general. Not so much installed apps, but the web are things that we always take into considerations. Like for example, everything is HBS with TLS. As far as doing anything interesting with the web, you
Just,
want it to be
just
secure.
for folks who might not know those acronyms,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
can you make
I
that?
speak in way too many
No,
acronyms.
it's all right. We have folks in here
Right.
of every age. Some people are in
Okay,
grade
great.
school, some people are in high school. So we're just trying to make sure that when we
Sure.
use an acronym, just try to help them out. Maybe I'll get it wrong
Right.
too. Maybe I need the
Okay.
refresher.
So HTTP, right? That's just the protocol that's using when you type in a URL, browser goes out and makes that request. HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol with S for secure. That's doing a lot more. That's making an encrypted channel. It's doing something called non-repudiation, which means, yeah, that really is the server that I want to talk to and not some other server.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this stuff happens to make sure that you can put in your credit card in your web browser and buy something, right? So that people aren't sniffing along the line. It basically stops. Nothing's 100% secure ever, right? Like that's just the way it is. But this will help so that nobody can jump in the middle and read your credit card number, over the air,
right,
or over the wire. And so that principle there of using a secure channel is something that we really should be doing. Not everybody's doing this, but everybody should be doing this when they put something in their house that is going to establish a connection out to the internet and then have a communication channel back and forth with whatever service.
Right.
But that one is huge. That's a big deal. And I'm most of the things that we deal with or that we see out there these days are that. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, the net's been moving to HTTPS, thankfully. So
right, yeah, and it helps things like your search results for your website to have HTTPS. You're higher up the Google search. For you to turn on, I'll show some cool browser stuff in a little bit. But
I thought it was also neat that how it doesn't just authenticate that you're hitting the server that you're hitting, mm-hmm. but it also prevents other people from knowing which server you are requesting.
Yes,
to some degree.
Right. So
there are limits to that, but yes.
Right. So we consider those things as sort of baseline security when we're building an IoT device for a client or just working with some existing hardware. But that's one very important facet. But there are things, of course, if a server is compromised and leaks a bunch of unencrypted passwords, things like that. That's that's bad. And just the fact that it is connected to a billion devices out there on the internet might seem like it's an IoT problem or an IoT security problem, where that's just sort of a general security problem, but could be multiplied by the fact that now passwords are leaked and we're in your house, right? So
right.
All the same, and I am not a security expert. I always have people to help me out with this stuff here, so that all of those principles already apply in security. Probably more so, you have to be more careful.
What are your thoughts on bricking devices that fail to? First off, let me back up and say, do you believe that as a IoT developer that the responsibility for the security is on your shoulders or somebody else's shoulders? And if it is on your shoulders, how do you feel about these new I guess anti-malicious bots that are going around trying to brick different IoT devices? Bricker bots. Yeah. How do you feel about that?
It's not. That's a tough one. I don't like it. Just as an engineer, it bothers me a little bit. Same way that things are obfuscated with hardware in general, and not just, you've been locked out of this device because this device is bad. But at the same time, I've seen over the years that certain manufacturers will disable certain parts of the hardware because if you buy the premium model, it's the same hardware, but they've unlocked some feature and firmware. And any of that feels like shenanigans, and turning off somebody's hardware, bricking it, something, especially if they paid for it. I could see not wanting something to just have a barrage of traffic from a botnet. I don't want somebody messing with my hardware. I try to keep all my stuff updated personally, but you never know.
So you agree with the goal, but not the means. So making it so this way insecure bots become secure, or I'm sorry, not bots. Sure. Sorry, insecure devices become secure, but you would rather that they're not destroyed in the process.
Well, and so would it on the same note? It seems like as much as I did not care for Internet Explorer version 6 as a developer, would it have been right to go and delete all of those and replace them with Chrome or Firefox? It would have helped out the internet in general, sure, but I don't think you should.
You really framed that question in a way I can understand. Like, I was having a moment in my head where I was like, oh wow, if I had a button and I could have pressed it, and I could have just deleted Internet Explorer from the world,
replaced it with Firefox.
I think we would. I would agree that we'd have a longer conversation before I'd inevitably press that button, but
Well, and what is it? There's being right and there's being nice. And,
I mistake that too many times. You're absolutely correct. So let's talk a little bit about flow-based programming, because I feel like that's going to circle back to the Internet of Things stuff, because Elio's giving me some intel there and let me know that you do stuff like that. So let's first start talking about the flow-based programming and what it is, and go on to PageNodes, which is your tool, which does flow-based programming, and then we can tie it back into the IoT stuff. So, so what is flow-based programming? First off, just from like, let's say that people already know what programming is, so we don't have to get to that level. But somebody already writes some programs. Maybe they run them through a runtime. Maybe they compile them down or something like that. Where does flow-based fall into all of that, and how is it different?
Sure. Well, when we think very, very low level about writing programming, you can almost think of it as a script, right? We have a start, some entry point. We execute a bunch of things and it's over. Flow-based programming, we could think of it in that sense, but I think it's better to think about it in that we have, and it particularly applies to Internet of Things, but we have a series of inputs and outputs. And it's more event-driven. So an event could be, I got a tweet, so do something with that tweet. And if we think about things in terms of events, that's a little bit more real world modeling as far as the Internet thing goes. Somebody turns on their internet connected toothbrush, that sends out a message to company that cares that somebody turned on their toothbrush for whatever reason. But that's an event. And we don't think about either one of these pieces being a script that's starting up and ending. We're thinking about some data moved somewhere. And so with flow-based programming, we consider each part of the flow here a message that's traveling along some sequence, and maybe we're inspecting that message, or we're changing that message and sending it somewhere else, or storing that thing somewhere. So it's more that we're visually drawing flows of data and interacting with those flows of data.
And when you say drawing flows, when I've seen it, it does look like a flow chart. Yeah. So like. It looks like, you have little nodes and you have arrows in between them. And so that's really how we're thinking about this. We're thinking about these discrete things that do something, and then they pass them off to another discrete thing that does something else until you get to, say, the end node. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, and that end node could push out to some other flow somewhere, right? Because that's basically just sending a message. And typically, especially with the Internet of Things, what I've seen is us use JSON, which is now pretty much the standard. It's a JavaScript object notation. It's just a way of formatting text to describe an object. That object could be anything. Typically, it has some payload of data that we're interested in, some topic. So the fact that we seem to have settled on JSON as a format for these messages, and we've sort of settled on, just as an industry, that these things are some object with some type of payload and topic in them. That's really useful that we've sort of evolved these standards here, because I can now send that message on to some other service that's consuming it, and maybe it's doing its own flow, maybe it's not a flow-based thing, but either way, a message comes in somehow, passes through some logic, goes out somewhere else. Or maybe it ends. Maybe we're just taking it in, we're storing it, we're done. But we have the opportunity to keep moving these messages around in a common industry format, and it's been very productive.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I agree with you, because when I was first getting into flow-based programming to solve this business problem we had, I thought, wow, what a cool new thing. And it wasn't. It wasn't new at all. In fact, the principles for this were developed in the 70s, and so. The flow-based programming has been around since the 70s in some sort of a form. I just never saw it until, I think 7 years ago is when we first actually saw it in some sort of a form that would solve something that we wanted to get solved. Did you see? I mean, in your experience, did you see it have a resurgence of because of these protocols, because of things like JSON? It became more popular because of those things.
I think so. Also, sort of the rise of IoT and funding for IoT companies and projects and things like that. That I saw the resurgence in it. So I've been running my consultancy for 6 years, and it's been mostly Node.js. The previous 14 years, I was doing Java Enterprise, and that was in medical and in finance and things like that. But none of that was really flow-based programming. That was all typical Java object-oriented programming. Big databases, servers and everything, but not using this model. And there's still, I have by no means am I saying this model replaces everything. It replaces one facet of things, and that is event-driven IoT modeling, really connecting. Yeah. And so it works pretty well for that, but it's not. It is definitely not a silver bullet for everything.
It's really interesting what you were just saying, because you had brought up that IoT was what was sort of a motivator behind flow-based programming's renewed popularity. And
it seems that way.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me is how conducive flow-based programming is to Internet of Things. So if I had 5 devices throughout my house, and they're sending information between each other in order to do different things. Well, of course, I don't know if we have it quite to that point now where 5 devices in my own house are going to communicate. But still, let's just, you know what I mean? I have 5 devices. Maybe one of them is a cloud. Maybe one of them's at the office. But they're communicating. They're sending information back and forth to each other. If I wanted to actually create a topological network map of what that looks like, that would look like a flow-based program.
Absolutely. Yep. You have a reference to a device. It emits some kind of data. It could be doing anything. It could be your heart rate monitor sending, every so often what your heart rate is. It could be the temperature of your refrigerator. It could be anything, right? All of these things here, and I think that it does map perfectly visually to this as well. But it isn't just that. Because some of these things are going to be talking to each other. Some of these, there's a whole lot there. It's a giant topic, but absolutely, we have things that are setting sensor data. But there's also times where we are actuating that as well. We're sending it back out. We are changing the color on the LIFX bulb, the RGB, right. All of that. So, yeah, it is an important concept that we consider these devices as sort of nodes in a visual representation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one correlation of this thing is this thing on the screen, but that works as a good analogy.
It sounds like it's a very logical progression from, say, Unix pipes, because we have these very discrete black boxes which have an input, we have an output. Some of them are true black boxes. We don't even know what happens on the inside of them, but they do something pretty useful for us. And we, in Unix, we would just pipe these together in a linear fashion. I'm not actually familiar with very many. I don't know of any tools where I could create a pipe that then goes out to other pipes that then goes out to other pipes. And so that really is the paradigm of flow-based programming, which is it's like a multi-dimensional Unix pipe, if you will, where it's like fully realized. But then when you bring in the IoT, it's like the full realization of the Unix promise, which was that you could have this one operating system which is going across all these different devices, and you can just you can add in more devices here and there. It's very interesting that these concepps, which we developed in the 40s and the 50s, and these are great ideas. They're still great ideas. We're just coming up with faster ways of being able to utilize them.
It does. The Unix philosophy, the Linux philosophy at least, has been to make these very small bits of functionality we're stringing together. We're piping, or we'll tee out and send it to a couple of things. But each one of these utilities is pretty small, and that also is a pretty good analogy to the what each node looks like in this graph of your flow. Anyways, what each one of these things is doing, it should be doing something small. It should be doing just one little translation on your data. or something, or storage or something like that.
But what's another interesting thing is it seems like flow-based programming, whereas we have a different man page for every single one of those Unix, devices or programs or whatever you want to call them. We have inputs, we have outputs, different protocols for the inputs and outputs. Maybe sometimes it needs an awk script. Maybe sometimes it needs something else. Flow-based really puts everything under a single set of common protocols, a single set of common tools. So this way, to me, it seems like a natural progression above and beyond the idea of just the discrete function with inputs and outputs, or the black box. Instead, you have a black box with a rule set around it that says that all of our black boxes are going to be more or less communicating in the same protocols.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, we could have particular shapes of the payload that might not make sense to the next step in the flow, but overall, we have this. They're all JSON. They're JavaScript objects, and we can count on them having a payload. Is a big chunk of it's a big step in that direction.
I think I'm talking a whole lot to try to paint a visual picture of something that we had already set up a way for you to show off your tool. So cool. Before we show it off just yet, you want to take just 5 minutes and tell us about the inspiration behind it and why you felt like it wasn't already invented already?
Well, so there is a ton of prior art here. Definitely, if anything is great here, it is, standing on the shoulders of giants big time. And this particular one, a whole lot of this came from IBM. They made something called Node-RED, which is incredible. It's a flow-based programmer, except there's a couple of very big differences between what I have now and what I started with. So I originally forked Node-RED, because I wanted to do certain things different. But Node-RED is it's a client-server application. You are running Node.js on a server or on your laptop, somewhere like that. But it's a back-end program. And then we have a web front end. We open up our browser. We tell the browser to go to that back end, and they interact. One of the things that I wanted to do differently with this is I didn't want somebody to have a server or to know how to set up a server. I wanted them to just go to a web page and do flow-based programming. So I took a big chunk of their user interface, and I did a back end that could work inside of a web browser. So instead of having this as a two-piece back end, front end, go install this thing, I wanted all to just run in the web. Also, I'm a huge proponent of just doing things with the web whenever possible, as opposed to putting them in iTunes or the Android Play Store, or
as Elio would say, contributing to the problem of centralization.
Yes, so I
will chime in here and say I do miss real apps written efficiently in real programming languages with real memory management. I miss those very much, but no, when it comes to a real app that is freely available versus some of this BS in those app stores, yeah, let's go with the web.
Well, it sounds to me like Louis found something that's a good middle ground for you, Elio, because it's technically still a real app, considering it's, from what I understand, it's using local storage, and it's going to be using all-in client technologies, trying to avoid touching a server unless you're trying to get to an API or something.
Unless you explicitly want to touch a server, you don't.
Exactly. That's as close to a real app as you can get now.
This is why I invited him on, because his stuff's as solid as I've seen. Because a lot of this stuff, like we actually, last year, Jay and I went to California, and we met with Brewster Kahle from the Internet Archive, and he made a whole thing about we need to pull computing into the web. But I think it's the opposite, quite frankly. I think we need to pull the web out to all of computing. I think by pushing it all into the browser, we're gaining all the downsides of the browsers, the bloat, the incompatibility, and all that, we need to pull the idea of web networking out of the browser to just be pervasive.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not even going to let us get sidetracked on that conversation because it's just too big. And I'm going to go back to the fact that there is still awesome utility in being able to open up a browser and just have something there that's working already. So let's get back to that, Louis.
Okay.
So
I started with Node-RED, which is awesome. If if you like Node.js and you've never done this before, go check that out. That's maintained by a couple of great guys.
Oh, is Node-RED written in Node.js then?
It's Node.js with a web front end. The two guys behind that are awesome. Really friendly guys too. They've been great to a ton of inspiration from them. Also, a ton of code from the user interface part as well. I've taken from Node-RED. My stuff is also open source, just like their stuff is open source, licensed the same way. Okay, so I wanted to make sure. One of the things I wanted this also to be used in education. I want this platform to leverage the good parts of the web and to be able to run on Chromebooks. Chromebooks, you don't install, by default, you can't install a Node.js application onto a Chromebook. You can open up a web page in a Chromebook, but web pages these days can do a ton. So I made this new sort of execution engine that runs in a browser along with all of the user interface stuff. I've made enhancements to the user interface as well. It's still very much Node-RED things on the front end with some differences. We'll get into that here right now. That was my inspiration. I also did some work for a company named Octoblue. They're before they were acquired by Citrix, I was contracting, and they have a separate product which is also incredible. Octoblue is they have another flow designer. I love the user interface. I wish I could take that from them because it's so good. Their user interface on their flow designer, it's just got really great icons. The zooming on it's really cool, but it's a totally separate, completely separate than this one.
I plan on picking your head when it comes to that particular interface because I got to see PageNodes beforehand. So we'll talk a lot about that.
Okay, great. I really like the visuals that they have on that one. It's all culminated in over the last year and a half or so of me, maybe it's a little longer, I can't remember. Anyways, of me working on this project as an open source project. My company does a bunch of different open source things, but this one's pretty close to my heart because I've been able to use it in education. I've seen the lights go on in a few kids' eyes when they actually connected up some hardware and interacted with things, and they were doing it, from $150 Chromebooks. So
those poor kids are going to think that's how all the rest of the tech works. They're going to think, oh, it's just that easy to hook up and it just works so well. It's all downhill for them. They got to start off on the top of the mountain,
Yeah, someone's going to throw Visual Studio at him or something, and
All right, so that's really awesome. So I think you have a demo for us today?
Yep, sure. Okay, let's jump in. I am not sure from this interface. I should have asked you this earlier. How do I jump into sharing my screen?
It says, so you just hover over where you see the cameras, and you'll see the green icon at the middle bottom that says share screen.
Okay. All righty, let's share my browser. And okay, cool. Are you able to see it?
Yep, we can all see it right now.
Okay, so let me shrink it a little bit so that the cameras don't take over the debugger. Okay, a little better.
Yeah, I'm going. Okay. I'm adjusting. You can keep going. I'll adjust to make it look as good as we can.
Okay, I'm running a local build here just because I want to get into my production build a little bit in a minute, because the production build, I actually have a bunch of flows in here that I want to show off that do some cool things. But you basically get here just from going to PageNodes.com. So that's open right there. Anybody can get to it, PageNodes.com. All right, but I'm running it locally just for purposes of demoing things here in a sandbox. So the first thing is we have a list of inputs, outputs, and a bunch more than that. But let's start with our inputs and outputs. So I was saying we basically want to take a message, do something to it, send it off somewhere. So let's start with the absolute most basic example is just a manual way to insert a message into a flow. And then we can send that message somewhere. So we've injected a message and sent it off. Every time we make changes, we have to hit the run button. So if this green node here is a debugger, and what that does is it takes any message and it spits it out here to the debug panel. So this one right here, I said, is for us to manually inject a message. So let's do that. I'm going to hit the button, and we logged through this output here. So that's it. That's the end. That's the start of a message. It created a little packet of JSON and debugged it.
And you were just dragging that from the left on there, and then those little where the line has connected the two, you just dragged from the one little box to the other little box.
Right. Yeah. So we just connected a flow,
and it's always going from left to right.
Right. Yeah. Although there's nothing stopping you from doing that, it just
gotcha.
would not look very good.
Naturally goes from left to right.
Right. And so the one of the largest pieces of code to build PageNodes here is this this actual flow designer. This is written in scalable vector graphics (SVGs), and that is all IBM right there. That part was, I'm glad I didn't have to write that. I'm glad I got to write the rest of the internals for how this thing executes and add a bunch of features to it. But that part's, if anybody wants to, this is all open source. Go take a look at it. That's some interesting code there.
I recently had a professional application for something that would be better presented as flow based like this with a UI like this, and it was a very difficult. There's a lot of commercial solutions out there for this particular type of a thing, but very few good open source versions of it. Right. This works so well, and everything just drags the way you would expect it to.
Yeah, I'm very happy that they made this part open source here. Well, they've made all of their stuff open source, so I'm very happy I was able to leverage that.
So for the timestamp thing, you could have put anything you wanted in there, but in this case, it was a timestamp. Right. So
let's do that. I'm going to double click on that node, and then I can change the properties here. Now, remember I said most things have a payload and a topic. The default topic here is empty, but I can put a topic of hello. And the payload right now is just the timestamp. It's just a Unix timestamp, just a big giant integer. Let's change that to something else. Let's do a Boolean. That's a pretty simple one. So true or false. Okay. Now, if I made a change and I'm going to run that. If I inject that, my payload is now true, but we're just logging the payload. What happened to that topic? What we could do is instead log out the complete message object here. And if I inject that one, we can look at the JSON. This looks like JSON, right? So here is our curly braces that we usually have, and here's a few properties. The topic, hello, payload, true, and then also each one of these gets a unique ID, or pretty unique ID. And
unique enough.
Unique enough, right?
You saying your entropy source is not solid?
It's a mapped out random, I think.
Every 15 billion nodes, something collides.
Right. Sure. Not typically a problem for something like this because I'm not actually passing a bunch of messages into one thing and caching them and doing something like that. In this case, I'm just moving the message along. But okay, so this is pretty simple. We've injected a message in here, but let's change something on the fly. Let's pass it through something.
How did you delete the line between the two?
Oh, I'm sorry. So when something's connected, if you just select it, you just hit backspace.
Oh, cool.
If you're on mobile, you can hold down, and a little menu pops up to hit delete. This stuff works on. It works on Android and Chrome, mobile Safari. The thing is, it hopefully gracefully degrades on browsers that don't support everything that this supports. Most of this stuff is all pretty basic, just sort of messages in and out. But when I get into more of the hardware, the browser hardware access, mobile Safari doesn't do a lot of that. Firefox does some of it. Chrome does most of it. but I'll get into that in a second here. So what I want to do is pass through another node here. And this right here is a change node. This came out of Node-RED. I really like this one here. What we could do with it is just change any one of the properties to something else, or delete a property, or something like that. So let's make the payload. It was true. Let's make that to now I'm changed. And so if we run this and we inject that, we can see that the payload has changed. So we basically did a transform or a mutate or something onto that message as it was flowing.
I see. So I was wondering because some of these seem like they could accept multiple inputs, but there was only one line going into it. It's because you can have multiple values set in a single packet, or I guess it's called a message or an event in this.
It's message usually.
Message, gotcha.
Message seems to be the common term for all of these things here. All of the different Flow-based one, OctoBlue, Node-RED, Losant. I think they have the concept of message as well. Okay, so in fact, we can do a different one here. That the payload doesn't matter because we're going to change the payload. We'll make this one hello 2. And so if we run that, then if we inject a message from here, our topic is hello2. If we inject it from this top one, it's just the hello.
Oh, I see. So
we could totally have multiple inputs going to anything.
And can you merge multiple events into a single event and things like that?
So we can do something like that. These are a little bit more complex, but we can have, where'd they go here? A split and a join that can can sort of cause a bunch of messages from an array, or join all of those messages back into one thing when they're done.
Oh, that's super cool.
Have that. And those were relatively recent to Node-RED, and of course I had to bring them into here because I really like those ones. So let's see here. What else I wanted to show? Oh, okay. So we're just doing debugging, and debugging is cool, but browsers can do way more than just put text on the screen. If, let's say, for example, notify, and if we were to connect this output here, and let's actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the debugger here. I'm going to run this, and if I execute this, notice what happened. It brought up a little browser notification thing. Now, the first time you run that, it's going to ask you permission to do it. So there's a lot of things in here in the browser that if you're running from PageNodes.com, will ask you permission. Do I have permission to access your web camera? Do I have permission to send notifications? There's a lot of things like that.
Yeah, so that's a good thing, though. You don't want it just grabbing
that. Yeah, absolutely. There are a few things that I'm surprised we're able to get to. There are some fun hacks here. But for the most part, anything that's going to interact with hardware or anything like that is going to prompt you first.
And so I can, and as one of these events in the beginning, I could also, for instance, perhaps set it up so it goes out, taps an API, and then pulls back the information from that API, and that's a new message that'll go through, right?
Yep. In fact, that would be over here. There is an HTTP request, and we could basically do, get, post, put, delete, put in a URL, and what happens is if say we want to do a post, and that's like submitting a form in a web browser to some backend, we would basically send our payload. So if we were to inject, from hello here, we know our payload is the string. We would be posting that to that thing, and then the response we get, we can maybe send to the debugger.
Okay, so then that was the thing I was trying to think of in my head was how do we get across, for instance, having to authenticate with a particular service before we can do anything with it. So we would just send off a HTTP request using, I guess the inserts would be the, like our password or our token or whatever.
So we could also put on one of those HTTP requests, we could put a property, we could set a property maybe using this change thing here so if we were to add another one and maybe make this headers, and we made this another object, and this could be, username, something like that. And so that's a piece of JSON that gets set on the headers property. HTTP requests is expecting, if you have any special headers, you're going to put that in the headers property before it makes it out there. And there's, although I believe, no, that's right. Node-RED's version of this HTTP request lets you specify some headers like for basic authentication directly in here. So that's a little bit different. But yeah, the concept is we want to customize that object before sending it off to some API, like just posting to some website or something.
Well, let's say I was unaware of the request, the request paradigm there, where you would expect it to be in request, and I got stuck. Where would I go to try to unblock myself?
So there is help on these guys here on the info.
Oh, cool.
So some of them
it's right
have
there
a
at
little
the
bit
end.
of help.
Yeah, I see it.
Some of them have some help inside of these, but they all should have something here. And if there is something on ones that were specific to me, so about half of these nodes are ones that I came up with, maybe a little more than half. Half of them are ones that I took from Node-RED. The ones with Node-RED all have great documentation. Mine have okay documentation. So this thing, yell at me and tell me that it isn't documented, and I'll fix it.
Well, at the end of this, you have your chance to appeal to the open source community to come in here and help you with documentation, huh?
Right, that'd be great. All right.
That is really cool. What other kinds of inputs? Because you have all kinds of stuff over here on the left: Mesh, Blue, Socket.io. Some of those look like they're associated with like services, or how's that all working?
So we have, let me kill that guy there. Okay, so for example, event source, this one's kind of generic. I don't know if this came out before WebSockets or not, but server sent events, SSE. All right, so what this actually is you make a request out to a server, and it holds a connection open, and then the server can anytime push data along that channel. This isn't used a whole ton anymore because most people do things with bidirectional sockets. But think of this as a one way of the server to push events to you. And if you know a server that can do that, you can put in its URL. Actually, we put in the URL here. And we can listen for a particular topic of events coming across, and those will just pump events through. So this one's generic, but it's not all that common anymore. I had to put it in here because there's actually a very small amount of code, and I just thought it made sense. There was a couple of cases where I was using it for, can't remember which flow it was, but it was somewhat useful. There is so Mesh Blue. Mesh Blue is great. This is the core routing tech from OctoBlue. So OctoBlue, good friends of mine, and I wanted to easily integrate to all of their OctoBlue services. It's really a WebSocket. It's basically a bidirectional connection to their routing, their infrastructure. So then
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, so it's possible for companies to create specific nodes that integrate with their specific services.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's all open source, and even if you wanted to run this, so this Mesh Blue node here, I've got 4 PageNodes as well as I wrote the Mesh Blue connections for Node-RED itself. So if you want to run Node-RED by setting up a server to run Node-RED, you can have these nodes as well. But what this does here is we're going to establish a connection to Mesh Blue, and Mesh Blue lets us just for free create a device. So think about it as my browser is now a device on their IoT platform. I've got an ID and a token for it. And I'm sitting here listening for any messages that somebody wants to send to my device. So this is a real good example of sort of IoT message routing, is that I said, browser here is device, but another device could be a Raspberry Pi connected to an Arduino somewhere that's got an ID and token. or something in their cloud running one of their flows could also be another device.
So is this a way for, say, if I don't have an Arduino, I don't have a small device to be able to put code on and test it that way, then using the OctoBlue platform, I'm essentially registering my own browser as a device, and then I can prototype out what I would want a particular device to do without needing a device other than the computer I'm currently on?
Absolutely.
That's
exactly
so
what we're doing.
cool.
In fact, one of the there is something called a Chrome Bit, which is like a Chromebook or a Chrome box. It's a little stick. It's about $80 or so. We have that plugged into our TV at the office. So the TV is acting like a big Chromebook with this little stick behind it. That's running PageNodes, and that ends up being an IoT gateway.
Wow.
Because that thing has access to because PageNodes has access to a ton of that hardware, and it can just route messages. We can connect it to MeshBlue or any other type of IoT service that we can connect to, and we're doing IoT routing. We're treating it as a device out on the cloud that can receive messages pushed to it, or can send messages out.
In your own IoT consultancy, do you dog food with this?
Yeah, so for certain things, for some of the consultancy has actually been running educational things, and absolutely that's easy, especially with the robotics things and stuff like that. We do have some proprietary parts that are not shown here that we have used as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right into another part of this because you just brought it up. You brought up robotics, and we've been talking a lot about webcams and a bunch of different things that don't actually physically move. But it seems to me like this would be really, really cool for being able to plot out the behavior of a simple. Well, I'd imagine this can get as complicated as you want it to be, but since I can only make simple robots, I'm imagining a simple flow here. So this would mean that I could, for instance, take an Arduino and or a Raspberry Pi, for instance, more because it's already got an operating system on it, right? And then I could use that Raspberry Pi, connect a monitor to it. I can use PageNodes and OctoBlue to create this IoT device. And then once I have it pretty much prototyped out the way I want, I can go over, hook it up into my robot, and it's just going to work.
Close to it. So those two cases are pretty different, being a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino. So an Arduino is just a microcontroller. It's just really good at doing inputs and outputs, right? Where a Raspberry Pi being a full operating system, it's basically a little Linux computer, right? And so that thing is going to be, since it's going to be running Linux, and it has Wi-Fi on it and Bluetooth and all this, we're probably going to want to put some code on that thing specifically that can receive messages or talk to the pins. Whereas an Arduino, we might want to just connect it directly to PageNodes.
Okay, I think that's where I got a disconnect then. So how do I take code that I would create on, say, PageNodes and put that onto an Arduino?
So the Arduino itself, think of Arduino as the way we've been doing robotics with from JavaScript anyways, is JavaScript's actually too big to run on an Arduino itself. The Arduinos are pretty small. They're really good at input output for the electronics, but they have a very small amount of memory. So we use a common sketch on there called Fermata. Now, Fermata, think about it as like that Arduino being this little server that's listening for messages on a serial cable, right? So that little guy running this Fermata sketch, and Fermata is actually based on the old MIDI protocol, but it's basically knows if I get this series of bytes, turn on this LED, turn this servo 90 degrees. The Arduinos themselves are just little servers listening for messages coming in. They could be standalone. In Arduino, you could do whatever you want on it, right? You can write something, it just stands alone. You plug a battery into it and it does its thing. But the way we've been doing JavaScript to interact with the Arduinos is that they have a firmware that we're sending specific commands to. And that we can do from PageNodes. We can send we can very easily send messages that are formatted correctly so that the Arduino knows, turn the wheels on the robot, reach its arm over, grab the thing, do all of that.
Yeah, I was thinking of something much more complicated. I was thinking of a Raspberry Pi that's running an actual browser that's running PageNodes in it,
So
and then that's
there's
connected
a
to a
lot that can be done.
microcontroller too.
All of this can happen still, though we would probably need another little service running on the Arduino. I'm sorry, on the Raspberry Pi for PageNodes to talk to.
Okay, so then you have
Also,
PageNodes sending commands to an Arduino that's listening, and because of that, you can just sit there in your browser changing the behavior, and it's just going to start sending different patterns of events to
yep.
it, and you don't have to recompile, you don't have to upload
Yep.
anything new to it. It's going. That is a really great tight development loop.
Yeah, you just got to hit the run button. In fact, if I hit the run button now, what do we got here? MeshBlue is connected, so it's actually listening. Even if we got a message, it's not sending it anywhere yet. But so that happens. We could also hit reload. I've added recently the ability to just not have to make changes, just hit reload. Because the thing about dealing with hardware is, oh, I told it to start, but I didn't have the cable connected. Okay, well, let me connect the cable now. Let me start it again. So I wanted the ability to just say, hey, relaunch this flow without having to make any changes, right? Like, we want to, every time we hit run, we're saving the current state of our flow, and we're storing it in local storage in the browser. But we might want to just say, hey, kick it off again. I have to reset the Arduino, or I did something goofy over here.
Right. That is really neat. So have you? So I'm guessing you have actually programmed robots with this.
I have a robot right
Wow!
here.
Look at that. Hold on.
Before.
Yeah, you're going to have to unshare your screen before people can see it right now. I'm the only one who can see it at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I will show it. Actually, I've got, and probably at the end here, I'll give my Twitter and all that stuff. I posted some video of this particular robot. So I've got a little 6-wheeled rover here that we were having a lot of fun with last week, driving it around the office, driving it around the lab. It was it's pretty good, and that was all done just from a browser. There was nothing else to install. There was a particular firmware that's on the Arduino for the robot, but that's just another one of these things that's just listening for commands. But all of the actual logic is happening over in PageNodes.
Is it possible to have a camera on the device send back information?
Yeah, so that's a little more advanced because that would be something that would likely require an operating system on the, like not an Arduino specifically, like maybe a Raspberry Pi. But the Raspberry Pi could then possibly open up a WebSocket that lets you connect to that WebSocket to get data. So all within the realm of possibility. I haven't actually tried doing that one yet to PageNodes. But let me show you something real quickly here in PageNodes.
Sure.
As far as cameras go, we've got. Well, actually, I'm not sure how well this will work with the camera.
Are you on Windows?
No, I'm on a Mac.
It might work then.
Here. So I'm going to pass this guy through camera first, and this is a webcam. So when I inject a message, it's going to stamp something else onto. There, it's a little bit better. I'm going to stamp an image from the webcam onto our message as it's flowing here. So I'm going to inject a message and pass it through that. And oh, cool. So that worked. So what I did here,
wow.
and in fact, this right here, I added after I did this camera, we'll make it an animated GIF. This works with kids for some reason. They love the animated GIFs here. So if we. So that was all done in browser. That's using Get User Media. It's an API and on the web. It's how we're able to do voice and video from a web browser. So that is accessing web hardware there. So you this is just going to be on the webcam though. This is just where PageNodes is running. So if you want a camera on your bot, this is not the way to do it.
Sure.
But if you want to send a picture to your friend instantly through an IoT network. There you go. You
Well, I
can,
mean,
do that.
can I then, for instance, put in a node here that'll do a custom JavaScript transform, and I can do a transform
Absolutely.
right on that base64 data?
You can. In fact, it's really cool. Since for the last few years, since ES5 JavaScript, there has been the ability to deal with binary data, basically an array of 0 to 255, right? And if you can manipulate binary data, you can do anything, right? You can take an MPEG-4 stream and decode it and draw pictures in the DOM. You can do
Right.
anything. Um, but yeah, so the camera is giving us, this base64 thing here. I could pass it through a function here, and this would just be writing in JavaScript. So our message has a payload, and we can change that to something else. And then when we hit return here, that just sends it along the way. So we could absolutely just drop down to JavaScript. Now, I always feel like if I have to do a JavaScript node, I might have failed in the rest of the flow because something isn't easy enough that I can't just stitch it together, that the logic is complex enough that I need to, if the logic is so complex that I need to jump in here, I might be missing another node. So this is usually a last resort for me to have to do. And I could do a whole ton without that, but the option is there. And this, I spent a bit of time on changing how this works internally because I wanted to make sure that if a kid was programming an infinite loop, he didn't lock up his browser. And that works now. So if somebody puts just absolute garbage code into this thing, if it doesn't just blow up, it's not going to kill the browser because it's actually running in a thread. We've got in browsers now web workers. And a web worker is another thread. It's actually not in the DOM itself. It's not in the document itself. So it doesn't have access to a button on the screen, but it can just evaluate JavaScript. So it can manipulate that message and pass the message along.
Right. Yeah, somebody in our chat was just saying that this could be good for creating a doorbell type system. So if you had a device that when the button is pressed, it sends an event through here, you could take a picture from a webcam, and then send that off to text message or an email or something like that, right? So
And you can also, if we wanted it to be text, what we could also do here is we have text to speech on. So if somebody wanted to send you a message, in addition to the camera that the camera pick, we can. In fact, let me change this here to say. I'm sorry. Let's. The topic doesn't matter here. We need this to be the payload. So we make the payload hello everyone, and that's going to pass through the camera, and it's going to go through eSpeak. So I'm not sure if this will work, if we'll be able to hear it or not.
Hello, everyone.
Yep, we heard it.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if that would work.
Wow.
So that is something that's built into browsers now as well, text to speech. So potentially, if you have some message coming in from, say, MeshBlue or some other IoT provider that maybe has one of these MQTT connections or the event source or something like that, we can just have it speak it. So we were doing this, and I can't remember what it was for at the office, but we had that Chrome bit plugged into the TV. And it was an IRC channel. So it was an internet relay chat, old school chat. We had it connected onto some rooms, and those rooms were just talking through the TV. There's some really good chat rooms in there. The Linux channel was particularly entertaining. So just like people asking Linux help questions, and we just had those pouring through the TV using the eSpeak node until the other guys in the office started yelling at me to turn it off. So it was entertaining for me for a little while anyways.
Our viewer said that your text to speech was not entirely horrible. Is that going through the operating system, or is that something?
So the operating system provides a bunch of things, a bunch of voices, and Chrome will make, I think it makes whatever the operating system has by default available. So this list on, say, Chrome OS would be a lot different. some of them are good, some of them are not as good. If you really want to be entertained, I don't know. I'm easily entertained, by the way, but have this thing say your words in with an accent. So like here we go in Spanish. This is funny to me, anyways. So maybe. Okay, so
Right.
so I like that, but not only speak things with a different accent. We can also do voice rec, and I'm pretty sure this one won't work this way. But what we could do is get these in a loop. So it's listening to me as though I'm speaking English, takes those words, pushes them back out to to a different accent, and it keeps reinterpreting. It doesn't work if you have headphones on, but if you're just using your computer speakers and your computer's microphone, and you get this in a loop, it's pretty funny because interprets as English, pronounces with something else, and that loop usually degrades into something awful. I'm really entertained by this. I shouldn't be, but I'm really.
There was a whole program that did nothing but that called Babelizer back when Babelfish was a big translator, and it would just take text, you choose the languages, and it would just ping pong it back and forth like 10 or 20 or 30 times to see what you ended up with. And
yeah, it's nothing like what you start with. It ends up being totally different. And,
yeah. But you're talking to a guy where on my Commodore Amiga 1000 with text-to-speech synthesis, I just typed in a string of U's and thought that was hilarious. I mean, you. I just thought that was great. So don't worry. We're all the type who do that.
I do that sort of thing a lot.
So this looks really awesome for prototyping. What if I wanted to make it a little more solid and I wanted it to run not in the browser? Is that possible?
So for that, for the most part, you want to use Node-RED for something that's going to be running completely headless.
Are your nodes compatible with Node-RED?
A lot of it is, not everything. I took a different programming model with the way I constructed mine. Node-RED's they're different. I've translated some of these things to Node-RED so that we could run them both ways because I like what those guys are doing. I want to see Node-RED succeed. They're and they will. Their stuff is amazing. But I have some differences of opinion. Obviously, I've been programming for a long time, and when you do that, you get opinions, and some of them are different. So they can't just be dropped in. They can't just be copied and pasted into. The code can't be copied and pasted into Node-RED. There's a bunch of differences. But that said, I would like to show off here a big group of nodes here that I've got this robotic stuff, and this I have translated for Node-RED. So in particular, I'm a huge fan of Johnny 5. That's a library in JavaScript. It started off as a Node.js library, and it still is primarily a Node.js library to do robotics. And it's great. If you get a chance to play with Johnny 5, it's a good time. So I wanted to leverage this big open source Johnny 5 project into both Node-RED and PageNodes. So if you're in Node-RED and say you want to run, on a Raspberry Pi, the package is called Node-RED contrib GPIO. It's a lot to remember, but anyways, if you search for Johnny 5 and Node-RED, you'll come across this. It's basically this, but running headless without a browser. So if you want to get started quickly and start prototyping IoT things, or just playing with the tech, or actually building something useful, you can just do that in browser just like that. The getting started with Node-RED and robotics using Johnny 5 is there's a lot to it. I've written documentation on the Johnny 5 GitHub on how to do that with Raspberry Pi, but it's pretty involved. It's definitely not it's not a beginner task to do all of that.
Where do you want this to go? I mean, this looks amazing to me as a learning tool, and it looks. I mean, the only limitations I see, right now in, major limitations is that I can't just take this and move it onto a device real easy. But
you can in certain ways. So, for example, one of the cool things that IBM did here was in their editor was this. I can select a bunch of nodes, and I can export to the clipboard. And these nodes are defined with JSON. Not only are the messages JSON, but the how these things are saved is JSON. So
it's possible to have a transpiler for that then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a
But if you
compiler.
have,
Sorry, I've been in
if
the
you have,
JavaScript world too long, haven't I?
yeah, no, I do a lot of transpiling for sure. In fact, if you saw, I've got the build on this on PageNodes down, the transpiling to work in browser, down to about a minute. It was at about 6 or 7 minutes for a while, and on a quad core, 8 gigs of RAM machine. So lots of transpiling here. But we could take this JSON, and if the nodes are available in Node-RED, you can import this flow. So you can design something here, drop it in there, but not all the nodes are available. Like I don't have, web camera doesn't make sense on Node-RED. Node-RED's a node thing; it doesn't have a web camera. There's a bunch of other things that are web-based here. That there might be something similar in Node.js, but these are all built for the web. These things here are all specific, especially in this section here, hardware. We have a web camera. We have like GPS location based on your web browser saying where you're at. If you're on a mobile device, I don't know why we made this, but you can vibrate the mobile device if you want to send a message to that. Orientation, like accelerometers, X, Y, Z orientation of your phone. And those are things that are specific to web browsers. Also, this gamepad input, that is also using the web gamepad API. So we can just plug in like whenever I run these events, I like the NES controllers. Like there's USB NES controllers you can get for like $6.
Wow.
I think they're really cool, like super retro looking. And then I started to realize that the kids I've been like working with on some of this stuff don't care at all. It just looks like a goofy old controller, but I still like them. I still bring
Oh,
them.
well. I would have thought it was
so
super cool, Louis.
Okay. So those things, obviously if you were to use these things that are specific to the web and you try to drop them into Node-RED, they're not going to work.
Right.
In fact, they'll give you a big ugly red warning that, hey, these nodes are no good. Delete these ones, use something else.
Right.
There isn't a built-in Bluetooth thing for Node-RED, but I'm hoping that my web Bluetooth things are similar to what is going on in Node-RED on the Bluetooth side, so that eventually it'll just be the same, that it can translate. One's using the new web Bluetooth, and one happens to be implemented with using a library called Noble, which is Node's Bluetooth stack. So there's a lot of overlap, but if you wanted to, depending on your task too, right? Like if you want to just grab an Arduino and plug it in and turn on the LEDs and things like that, like you should be able to just use this here. You don't need to install Node and Node-RED to do all that.
Right. I'm thinking of, I mean, I love systems like this because I'm already thinking of cool things I can do with it, Like, one of the things I would like to do is create one of those Tokyo train station style alert systems in my house. So I have all these different tones in a certain scale for different things that could happen. If I get an email, it might play a C. If I get a text message on Twitter or something, it might play an A sharp.
Yeah.
So my
You can
start.
do that with this one here.
Oh, you can even do it with See, I was thinking nicer with the MIDI. So instead of just a.
Well, so the MIDI can be the MIDI. If you plug in a MIDI controller, so there's a lot here. I really like MIDI for a lot of reasons. One is that if you plug in like some USB MIDI device, it'll just show up. You start hitting keys, and messages start coming across as a flow. That just works. And MIDI output the same way. If you know how to form the bytes or what the things are that translate to playing a note, it's not very complicated. It's actually it's a pretty simple protocol. I mean, you have to work at the byte level, but it's still very simple. That you can make music in the browser here by controlling all of that. But what I did for this oscillator is using the web audio API. And in that case, we can just say how long, what's the duration, what does the wave look like? And there's some other stuff we can plug in there as well if we wanted to have more control over it.
Another really cool thing about this is, and the reason why I'm starting to lean very heavily towards this ought to be the de facto best way for us to create most types of IoT devices. And the reason why I say that is because Imagine I have no idea what this particular device does, and I just open up its flow chart, I suppose we would call this, right?
Yep.
Of what's going on in it. I get a picture, and I bet you I could grok exactly what that device does in less than 10 minutes, as opposed to me going and sifting
Yeah.
through code and trying to create a mental picture of what's going on. To me, the difference is night and day. We would have either hours and hours of grokking versus less than 10 minutes on the other side.
And that's one of the lesser trumpeted, like the advantages of flow-based programming, visual flow-based programming. It's self-documenting. Like it actually is.
Right.
You could even call it, I guess, self-diagramming code.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's great. You end up with, instead of having to do some analysis that takes forever to figure out, you just look at the flow and
You know,
you can
that's
figure out.
that's an interesting term I've never heard before, self-diagramming code, because
I made it up.
yeah, I know, but I mean seriously, I can see that becoming a very important term in the future, because when I come into a large code base, it's a long, when we're talking about a real actual corporate large code base, we're talking about a month of trying to ramp up and understand that code
Yeah.
base. If I could get a big old printed out diagram of that code base, I'll bet you I could cut that time down to a week or less, and or a day even. And so to me, the that is a huge margin. That is a non-trivial amount of time saved, and someday businesses are going to catch on and start hedging onto that. They're to raise their profits. So I this is really interesting to me, because I've used some flow-based programming on the back end stuff when it comes to just data processing, data massaging, really, and it worked very well for that time. But I didn't really see how it could be used outside of data at the time. I mean, I had some vague ideas, but this is, I mean, it's clear that with enough nodes on the left hand side there, I could create anything. If with just taking this one step further and making it so this way I can take this and then deploy it where I want to deploy it. Also, that would to me, those are the only things stopping this from truly catching on in a really big way.
I would say very much stay tuned for all of that.
And then Louis, if you don't mind my asking, do you see this also tying right into microservice architecture and I could imagine developing a microservice this way and loving my past self when I came back into this, like 3 months later, and I'm just immediately understanding what's going on in it again. This could, if Amazon were to create this flow-based interface or integrate this into their web services for Lambda, I would immediately start using it.
Absolutely. One of the things, so we've used Lambda, and it's gotten a lot better. When it first came out, one of the things that was tough was having to use the API gateway, right? So you make a function, but I want to export. I want to show that function as a web thing that I could call, right? That was a lot of steps, right? That was setting up what parameters are we taking in? What's the, like, there was just a lot to it.
Our company wrote an entire deployer for Lambda and API gateway. We called it Conan the Deployer, which I really liked, but still, yeah, I can fully appreciate exactly what you're talking about. It was so tough to get everything running up because,
absolutely. Well, but think about those things in terms of flow-based programming. We still have to say, I'm going to drop a node that means if you're going to hit this URL, we have to, okay, well, great, that kicks off a message. And in Node-RED right now, you can have an HTTP in and an HTTP out, not just the through. And the one that I showed you was to make an external request, but let's handle somebody sending us a request and let's give a message back. So we could already sort of stitch APIs together with flow-based programming, knowing that, okay, they made a request here. I've got a payload that somebody sent me on my flow, my headless flow that's running somewhere out there in the cloud. And I can do some data manipulation or query some database or do something, and the end point in my flow here is something that's saying send this back to the guy who asked for it, right? So
this is I mean I know I get it. I'm easily excitable, but I'm also a huge skeptic of new paradigms. I go yeah, you know, because I mean like people have been saying, oh yeah, we're only 5 years away from Lego style app building, right? And they've been saying that for 40 years. I just kind of go yeah, but this really looks like Lego style app building, and this wouldn't have made sense to me about 5 years ago before I started getting into microservices, because the idea of there being a monolithic application with a humongous flowchart to go over, even though technically I think it would be easier to grok than an equivalent amount of code, still we would have been moving on to the next problem, which is how do we make these things less giant and crazy. But with microservices, this seems like an inevitability. This is where it's going to go, because I know people in the future are going to be going towards this serverless architecture more and more often. It's cheaper, it scales better, it's an overall better development experience when you're dealing with very small things. Our problems right now in the serverless world are deployment and that's about it. It's really just deployment. And so this, to me, if the deployment part of this was done, where after I was done making my PageNodes, I made a particular microservice, and instead of just run up there was also a deploy button, and I hit that, and that somehow pushed this node code up into like a Lambda, or maybe not Lambda, but just any kind of a microservice, anything. Right. To me, that is so attractive that I'm already thinking, well, shoot, I should probably just build that, right? like whoever gets there first is going to have a very sweet product on their hands. I have to imagine that Amazon's got to be working on something like this already, right?
Awesome, they're behind me.
Yeah, no, man, this is great. This is incredible.
I would love to see, rising tide lifts all ships, right? So I think there is something here, and as many people, there's going to be a lot of competition in this space, and it's all really useful. So in the end, there's a ton of open source coming out of this, and people are able to, own their own IoT as well. One thing that I'm also doing here is making sure that you can own your flow because it's running in a browser. Well, if you could also own your flow because you're deploying it to either your private cloud or some service that we're hosting, you're the one saying, when I get this internet action, that I'm doing this thing. And so the fact that you've got 50 things in your house that are all connected to the internet, well, that you should be the one explicitly that decides where messages go. Right, that you're going to control the flow of everything, and the better that these types of designers get, I think the more realistic that is to assume that the average Joe can stitch together things that are important, that are actual interactions with the Internet of Things, that they will have control over these things.
While I definitely think that the average Joe argument there is obvious, and it's something that this is going to primarily probably be driven by people under a certain bar who still want to get certain things done. I do think that for advanced programmers, there's a lot of appeal here in, for instance, being able to visually see the flow of things for debugging. Like, a stack trace right now is essentially a really terrible description of a flowchart, right? And it's saying that it went here, then it went here, then it went here.
Yeah, and half of them are anonymous functions. You have no idea what that was.
Exactly.
Right?
When I was using flow-based programming for the data processing, when a certain node, didn't do a transform correctly, or if something happened that was wrong, that node would turn red. And you would actually get to click on the in-between between the nodes and see what data was flowing through that pipe, and to be able to see exactly where the problem happened. And I was able to do some very, very, very sophisticated data massaging stuff with this application that it would have just been, it would have been a huge project otherwise. It would not have been one person sitting down, figuring out some software, dragging nodes, figuring out the inputs and outputs and having it done. I'm truly blown away by this paradigm because my scope of what this would be useful for was all data driven. Now I'm thinking, wow, I have to learn this in order to have a job in 10 years.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but sure. Yeah. I mean, or some type of something like this, right? You've got to be able to stitch data flows together in one way or another, whether it means you're drawing things here, or you're connecting them somehow, or you have another app that says, hey, when this thing happens, this thing happens. Absolutely. I think everybody should have that power anyways, right? Like there is a reason why you wouldn't, that people shouldn't, right? And if we can, keep a ton of this open source and just, make it all available. Like right now, distributed, like Elio was mentioning earlier, that this could be distributed with decentralized networks, right? That it could be that this could be in everybody's hands right now.
I agree, okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. Why isn't this mainstream? Why aren't the tools more mature? Considering that this stuff came around, the ideas came around in the 70s, right? Yeah. Well, why is it that? Is it just because we didn't have stuff that like ubiquitous JSON before 5 years ago? Is it that people were still using SOAP? Can we blame this on Microsoft? That's basically what I'm asking.
I already have. I think a lot of it is just evolving standards, and that there wasn't as many open source projects. Right, like this right here is using, I don't know how many things from NPM is Nodes package manager. And I probably have 1,000 dependencies. I didn't write every single piece. I mean, I changed the back end, changed some front end stuff here. I've got, but a lot of the things like, what's a good example here? Oh, well, like the Johnny Five stuff, right? So all of this robotics stuff here, like the ability to just have a real simple API to tell a servo to do something. All of these things here are libraries that were that I was just able to pull in. This stuff was all written in JavaScript, so I was able to just bring a whole bunch of things together and make a dashboard out of it.
I'm going to alienate myself from some fans here, but I'm just going to. To me, this is the reason why a great package manager is meaningful. This is the reason why we're not doing this on Python. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's also it's isomorphic code, right? It runs in Node, and the same code runs in browser. That's important.
Yeah.
And I'll bring up that there's 500,000 modules in NPM. That's the largest by double. But the counter argument is, but half of them are crap. Well, if half of them are crap, that means there's 250,000 good open source modules. Right. To pick, right?
That's still a good point.
And I've been able to leverage just a whole ton of those things, and it's been great. It means we can stitch applications together. So not only, we can stitch things together here in the sense that we can do flow-based programming, but the code behind PageNodes, all of that is pieced together from IBM's Node-RED, from Johnny 5, from all kinds of open source packages that I curated. I did have to write a ton of code to make things work, but I curated a whole bunch of packages that were already open source.
This is already pretty well developed too. I mean, you can do things with this. This is not something that only has a few couple of demos that you can pull off with it. It's an open-ended system, and you can do all kinds of stuff with it. So I'm to me, it's more developed than, say, when I saw Babel for the first time. You know what I mean?
That was a great project.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and we're all very, very happy for what's his name, Sebastian, right? Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. But what I mean is like at the time when I first saw 6 to 5, right? It was not as developed as this. It wasn't something where you could just immediately throw things together. Now, in other ways maybe, but as a cohesive thing that you can demo to people and immediately get them to see the wow factor on it. I mean, it's here. So I'm wondering how long until this stuff is something that I'm going to need to have on my resume, because when I say I feel like now within a couple of years I'm going to start wanting to put flow-based programming in some way onto my resume, just so this way if there is somebody out there who's savvy, that they're going to see that and they're going to go, oh cool, right? Because in 5 years I imagine that this is going to be a job. And I think it might start with just something like microservices, because I mean, let's face it. If Amazon came out with this interface for Lambda tomorrow, they would own the market. It would just be over. Nobody else would be able to create microservices as fast. Not own the market, but rather they would lead the market because everyone else would copy them. So this is just an inevitability to me. And do you know of any other competing?
So I mean, IBM does host Node-RED instances through IBM's Bluemix IoT, and Octoblue has a different designer, not related to either one of these projects, and they're doing flow-based things there as well. But I don't know if either of them is really pushing for just making that your API builder, right? Yeah. Basically, as something that would be doing what Lambda does. It's really interesting though, because I hadn't really thought about it specifically as that. There's another one, I think Google may have purchased a company that has something somewhat similar to this for doing bots, right? For building bots, for building AI bots. And maybe that was Microsoft. I can't remember. I don't remember the names of all these things, but there are a few things in the works. This one is different in that it's like right in your face in browser, no sign up, open source, all of that, but I as far as I can tell, it does seem that things are evolving to use that paradigm, to use flow-based programming to make things easier.
You know what? I guess I'm actually sort of creating a false alarm here, because if anybody knows how to program and they come to this, I mean, they already know it. There is no learning curve. It's already there.
Well, I can say this. We had a couple weeks ago, Citrix contracted me to do an event with a bunch of 7th and 8th graders. 30 kids came in, and they built a little robot. They used PageNodes to program it, and they had a sumo wrestling thing where they push each other off a platform. That entire event was only 3 hours. It was actually less than 3 hours. So the kids went from assembling a robot, programming it, and enough time for us to have a tournament at the end in 3 hours. And they all picked it right up.
Only 2 days ago was I made aware of sumo wrestling robots, and I've watched probably 100 videos on them in the last 2 days, because I was like, oh my gosh, because they move so fast that they're obviously autonomous, right? And I was I'd never seen anything where it was like BattleBots that was completely and totally autonomous. As Elio coined a term also for the show, he called regular remote control death machines, right?
Yeah. So they have all the ones on TV where
these are autonomous death machines.
Yeah, they have a wheeled controller on a wheel base with basically a lawnmower blade upside down, and it's like it's scary looking, but if someone's just driving it via a remote control thing, it's not a robot in any meaningful way. It's an RC car that's super dangerous.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. One of our viewers is asking about sumo wrestling robots. Yes, there's basically a platform. It's a circle, and you have to push the other robot outside of the circle. From all the ones I've seen so far, there's actually like a small platform, so they get knocked off an edge.
Yep. We actually do this in Phoenix every July or so. There's this whole Johnny 5. It's a big community of people using JavaScript for robotics. But if in your area, wherever you're watching from, go to nodebots.io, I believe. Anyways, there's a list of events that are happening on July 29th. You can come build a robot, use JavaScript, and have them fight on platform basically at the end of the day. Is usually about what most of the events do. Some of them you build things and some of them might not be the competition at the end. The one that I'm running in Phoenix on July 29th is absolutely a competition at the end, and the robots will smash into each other.
Hey, Elio, I got a question for you. Why
Yeah.
why first off, I guess the first question is this flow-based programming used in any of the teaching programs that you know of with the kids and everything yet?
Um, that's so I want to say yes and no. So the ones that we use most often are Scratch and Snap, and Scratch is out of MIT. Mitch Resnick's been working on that with the team out of there. Very talented team for quite a while, and that was always my go-to. And then I kind of moved towards Snap a little bit, which used to be BYOB or Build Your Own Blocks, but the teachers didn't like that acronym, so now it's called Snap.
Oh boy.
But Snap is basically yeah. Snap is basically a clone of Scratch in pure JavaScript, whereas Scratch started out in I don't know if it's still Flash or not, but it started out there. I think they've been porting it toward JavaScript. Um, these days, I find the main difference is that um, I think Scratch is getting more expandable because that used to be the big difference is you couldn't add custom code, which you can definitely do in Snap. But the asset library in Scratch is much bigger, so it's easier to get going. You won't have kids like spending 2 hours trying to draw just the right character. They already have a whole bunch they can choose from.
Well,
But anyway,
well, that
they
gets
work about the same way. They're just not as flexible. When we talk about flows, the blocks snap together, but you can only put one block in sequence with another block. There's no way like you can do in PageNodes to take the output from one block and wire it to multiple other blocks or wire multiple inputs to one block. So it's a similar concept, but not as flexible, which for a learning environment, makes a lot of sense because the main goal is to just don't have syntax errors.
Well, then
Yeah.
the next major question then is why not? What is it about what could PageNodes add to fulfill that? Because for instance, you have told me about there's been a couple of instances where somebody tried to create a game or they tried to create some sort of a project and that the framework itself frustrated them or they something about it made it so that they quit, right? Well, this to me seems like something where they could get what they wanted much quicker. Is it that it's just not programming?
Well, that one, I hate to call them out, but I'll actually mention which one it was, and it may be much better now. But that incident was at the Great AZ Code Challenge. There was a little girl with a good app idea, and she wanted to implement it in studio.code.org, which is very similar to Scratch and Snap in theory. But the problem at the time, this was I guess almost about a year ago exactly, it just wasn't ready. It was beta quality software at best, maybe even alpha where it's not even fully feature complete. For instance, you could store tabular data, but there was no tabular view that you could automatically render it in. So you ended up trying to have to, just auto-generate your own tabular view. And it wasn't so much that there were any bad ideas in studio.code.org. It was just, it wasn't ready yet. And so I'll plead to any people working on educational stuff, please do not release beta versions of your software to kids or to anyone doing beginning programming. Test your stuff, test it heavily before you even consider releasing it for general use. You can release it to a small group of selected testers in alpha or beta stage, but please do not release it publicly if it's an educational piece of software, because what's going to happen is everyone who's on this show right now, all of us on the video conference, we've all got a decade plus in programming. So we all know when something happens, we're pretty good at figuring out whether it's something stupid one of us did or whether it's something stupid the person who built the software did.
Yeah,
and we know where to put the blame
I get your
most
point,
of the
but
time. or at a minimum, we're not going to internalize and be like, oh, I guess I'm not a good programmer and give up.
True.
But when you have someone who's brand new, programming, and this is a cultural thing we need to fix with the industry, it has this mystique of we're super smart, we're modern rocket scientists and all this. The last thing you want to do when you're trying to get someone into programming is give them more evidence that that's true and they're not cut out for it.
Okay.
Especially false evidence.
Let me rephrase my question then. Okay, my question is really, Do you think that kids ought to be taught flow-based programming today, or do you think that that's a little too ahead of the curve, and that they are going to grow up in 5 years and get a job as a
No.
regular
Yeah.
programmer?
I think they should definitely be taught stuff like this, whether it's flow or some other visual paradigm that comes up, because again, syntax errors will kill you. They will stop you dead in your tracks, and they'll waste a ton of your time, which is not productive. So by having flow-based programming, it's very easy to see what's happening. It's very easy to explore. I mean, this is one area where textual programming is still deficient, is like, look at PageNodes. There's a whole, on the left there, there's a categorized list of all the pieces, all the things I can work with, all the different nodes that I can stitch
Right.
together. And I can look at them and I can see, do they have a dot on one side or on both sides? And I can tell whether they emit or receive or process just by looking and glancing at them. It's really, really explorable versus looking at a textual language where I have to learn the entire grammar of the language, or it's not nearly as explorable. It takes more work, and if you have no experience in interpreting a programming language, you have to learn how to do that. Like, what takes input, what's an L value, what's an R value.
Well,
Again, stupidly easy to figure that out in PageNodes.
well,
I just look at one side, that's a dot, done.
do you think that that kids these days, like for instance, I guess my question is, should kids be doing we already answered that. We already know that kids should be
Yeah.
learning flow-based programming. The question is, why aren't they? So when we look at the events for, say, code day, right, it's an
Yeah.
emphasis on the code. If we
Well,
go to a place that's like,
I'll argue for that event. We do push snap and scratch. We let kids choose whatever they want, but if they have no prior experience, we recommend they start with snap, scratch, blockly, construct, most of the things. Unity, someone was mentioning in the comments.
oh, I think Elio got lagged out for a second, but
Yeah.
well, anyway, so I'm just wondering, like, the real question here is, why aren't we using this instead of snap and scratch? So snap and scratch, is that really just is it just that's really good for just dead beginners, or is it that it's wrong, bad terminology there, but new beginners, or is it that that I don't know. I guess my real question is why I don't see
Yeah.
this in every classroom, because it seems
Well,
to me like this is an awesome way to
yeah,
teach almost anything.
this goes back to our discussion earlier, our pre-show discussion about JavaScript. And JavaScript, it was a language designed in like less than 2 weeks initially, so it has some issues. It could have been designed better if they had spent a lot longer on it. Um, and so we had that, and you looked at the whole thing with ES4, and they proposed a better syntax, a better, like, they're like, hey, we're going to completely redo this language to what it really should have been if we had taken more time. And there was a huge amount of pushback in the community. They're like, it's too drastic. It's going to break all our stuff. Like, let's trickle out those changes over 20 years rather than doing it all in one fell swoop right now. So I think it's the same thing. It's inertia. People are used to textual programming being the only way to really program, to actually get work done. And there has been a lot of work to try to figure out ways to do productive programming like this, data flow programming, but people are just not comfortable with it yet. And so it's going to take people like Louis showing off, look what you can do, look how powerful this actually is, and having people build real stuff in it and saying, yeah, that was a lot faster and easier, and it's just as flexible. There really is no downside, and there's a few upsides. Let's just start using this.
Yeah, I guess I'm guilty of always looking at every technology and wondering, why isn't it already to this other point? Why isn't this already a thing? And it's because this is the next thing. This is a wave that we're riding out right now. So
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to touch back on from a second ago, we talked about distributed systems and data flow. And besides the ease of reading the code and constructing it and the discoverability, when you look at how data flow works, it's really, really amenable. When you talk about microservices and nanoservices and you talk about distributed architectures, this is exactly how all that works. So we may see this gaining adoption because you can literally have dedicated nodes and string them together. And these could, instead of just being lines on a chart, they could actually be like network connections between different actual nodes across a large system.
Mhm.
And is a great way to model. I mean, Brandon has some words about what you could do with something like Nebula if you had that, how you could write like an AI, distributed AI system or slash AI app marketplace. So, we just haven't gotten there yet. There's some new technologies that haven't caught on. And we might find that this is the best possible fit as we move toward those new technologies. And textual just doesn't quite cut it anymore.
Yeah, we could also distribute computation this way as well, right? Chris Matthew,
Yeah.
another Phoenix guy, he's working on something called computes, and it's a really easy way for us to send things out into a queue of CPUs waiting out there to churn on something. So it's if we know if we have a visual flow of how the data needs to go, and it needs to go out to 1,000 CPUs, but those things are going to run whatever. Those don't necessarily have to be a flow. Those could be just a gigantic algorithm that's doing some serious computation. That we are still stitching the messages together. We're still sending out. Here's this big payload.
Yeah.
Go out to 1,000 CPUs. Go and chug on all this data. When it's done, give me a response. Pump that into a flow, and now do something with that with the result. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have any plans on maybe adding in some machine learning nodes?
Nothing right here specifically. I've got a lot of plans for this in general, but that's not really my wheelhouse, right? So
Right.
I'll defer that, or if somebody has something that actually that makes sense that we can either put in the browser or that we can add to Node-RED or anything like that, then I'm all for it. I just don't have any immediate plans for that in here just yet.
We have a couple of viewers who are bringing up how this would be great for that flow-based programming would be great for useful machine learning. And that TensorFlow is also is an example of that, but that it doesn't have a sophisticated, fully featured GUI for it yet. And so that's sort of like how it is today, isn't it? That we have these mismatches where we have some really good back-end stuff, really good front-end stuff, and over the next probably 5-10 years, that stuff's going to solidify into a new paradigm for us.
Yep. But we've got, not only do we have the Lego pieces here in any one of these projects, but the fact that we are, using, MQTT or WebSockets or something to send the messages between these things, that we're typically dealing with JSON. We don't need one solution for everything. We could use, PageNodes to talk to Web Bluetooth that, gets some data that sends it off to something running on TensorFlow that then sends out, an SMS using some other service to your phone or whatever. That we could take each one of these pieces that are really good at something and stitch them together using IoT protocols, using JSON, text messages, things like that. So it doesn't have to do all of it, but it's nice if any one of these things, or if they're all similar enough that it isn't a big deal to go between them.
Right. Well, I just want to give you your 15-minute warning in case there were some things that we didn't get to cover on, and that things that you thought were important. We also have some people in the chat who have asked a couple of questions. So.
Sure.
So I don't have that chat up. Before I get to that, though, there was one thing that I passed by too quickly here. And so a big thing to distinguish between PageNodes and Node-RED. PageNodes is focused on browser capabilities. One browser capability that I like a lot more than I like, when I've had to do the same type of thing, it's been easier in the browser, and that's actually peer-to-peer communications. Peer-to-peer, like in having a peer-to-peer encrypted channel, is much easier to do in a browser than to do from, say, Node.js in the back end. So I've got P2P nodes here. So this is like an input and an output, and when you do peer-to-peer messaging, you have to use a signaling server, right? So we have one browser, on one side of the planet, another browser on the other side of the planet, but we want to send encrypted messages between them. they need to shake hands. And so they need to, one guy says, hey, I want you to talk to me. He sends out a packet. The other guy says, oh, cool, I got that. Here's a response. That little exchange isn't super complicated, but it has to happen so that way we can work out all of the networking. Like, how does this browser talk directly to that browser? They're both behind 10 firewalls, and there's all this, all this networking in the way. But browsers got this worked out. So I'm in right here. I'm actually using Mesh Blue in the back end to, and that doesn't have to be really apparent to whoever's using this, but that's just what we're doing to signal each other that, hey, somebody's interested in having a peer connection with you. Once we have that, we are sending messages directly to that other person. No more, the handshake is done. Now my browser is talking directly to your browser, and we can send anything through it. We could send, how the webcam picture? Well, that would actually be going over an encrypted connection over to another browser, or a document. I've got a little file upload thing, and it seems to crash after about 200 megs or so. And I think it's kind of a hard problem right now for me to solve that one. But we can, if you go less than a couple hundred megs, we seem to be able to send files between two people pretty easily.
That seems like a really great way. For instance, like sometimes when I was crunching huge data sets, I maxed out the 8-core. I have an 8-core CPU, and I maxed out all 8 of them, right? But I have a 6-core CPU over there, and I have a 4-core CPU over there. Now, being able to get them all working together and crunching the same data set is non-trivial in traditional ways, right? But in flow-based programming, and especially using the peer-to-peer clients, I mean, that is trivial. It is just another device.
You could visually build a mesh because, I could be the hub and a bunch of other things like spokes, or I could make it a token ring, and I pass a message to this guy, passes this guy, or I'm passing it to these three. Each one of those passes, everybody passes it to everybody. However, that's just you stitching things together. These nodes represent I'm connected to a particular peer. We've come up with some peer ID here. You have to share that ID somehow. I need, it could be an instant message or a text or whatever, right? If I were to go and create a new one, create the signaling ID here, and so this, I would basically have to somehow give this thing here to somebody else. That could be however you want. It could be in an email. But that identity, that person plugs in. That identity, that person would plug in as your identity, and this is just for the handshaking. But after that, I know, okay, that is this computer over here. That's my friend over there. And then I can stitch how messages flow. I could just as easily say, my friend's going to send signals that control my robot that's connected to my serial cable. Or this friend is sending, an animated GIF to me. But that's all direct messaging, and we could wire that up however we want.
And technically, I could also create a page node, or a PageNodes application that listens for other PageNodes applications to send them their client ID, and then redistributes those back out to everybody, so we don't even have to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's really cool. And that is so non-trivial. I keep on coming back to that. It is a non-trivial thing to do with traditional programming.
And this is something that is just really good in browser tech. I mean, in a lot of ways, native applications beat browser tech in certain things, but P2P, this has been working pretty well for a while.
That is excellent. We do have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
First off, have you thought of so for the flow-based application that I used, it allowed me to take one of these sheets here and turn it into a node itself. Is that something you have ideas for?
Yeah, so that is something that I got from Node-RED as well. So let's just say you're basically wanting to make like almost like taking a bunch of these things and making a function out of it that you call. Exactly. So you don't have to code this thing all up. So what we could do here is it's create a subflow.
Oh, cool.
And this is actually really intense. There's a lot of code behind this. I'm very happy with the IBM guys for doing this for me. So let's say we have an input.
Oh, that's and so cool.
We want to do something on it, like we're just gonna say if the payload is less than 1, Then we're going to do something if it's greater.
Oh, and you really don't have to worry about the casting there either, because in every node you can
Right.
recast it to
You can
whatever you
change.
want. Cool.
Right. Or you can change it. You can, right. So this is doing a comparison, saying that when the payload comes in, if it's less than this value here, which is a number of 1. So anyways, we have a couple of different things we can do. Maybe do some more processing on it, create an output. Actually, we can give, let's say we give it, 1 goes out one way, give it another output, 1 goes out the other way. And let me save that here. Oh, actually, let's not do that just yet.
Oh,
So if
wow.
we drop this on here, so that gave a subflow, and then maybe a mesh blue message comes in, it goes through that logic and then goes out to somewhere else. So yeah, this is all node. That stuff is all Node-RED, and I thought they did a great job on that.
That is super, super cool. I mean, my next questions are too geeky though. Like if we have 10,000 of those, are we just going to have a bunch of? So if I wanted to create, say, a library of subflows and things like that, then it would just require some UI enhancements. That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
right. So some of that stuff though as well. You don't. This part needs a little bit of work, and there's some stuff that I'm working on right now in order to just save stuff to an account. Right now, I don't. You can just go to PageNodes.com and start playing with it. You don't have to even log in. There's not even any ads. You can just jump in and start doing the flow. But if you do want to log in, we're providing a cloud so that you can save your flow and then maybe open up your mobile device and then log in and import your flow, so that there's some management there of it that does require logging in.
Sure.
It's just the nature of it, right? But you don't have to use any of that. You can. It just makes it more helpful to manage this.
Do you have any plans to allow it so this way multiple people can work on the same sheet, pure programming style?
Ooh, no, that sounds great though.
That's easy to add, right?
I do now.
Yeah, so that's something that a lot of us are into, especially on this show, because in the very beginning of the show, we used to do pair programming stuff, and turns out that the tech's just not very great for that. But if the tech could be implemented along the way while the rest of it's getting developed, then it sounds like that could be a core feature.
So one of the paradigms that Node-RED had is that you've got sort of like this influx thing. So you basically have it's almost like working with a document. You're making changes to it, and then when you hit the deploy or the run button, it takes all of that JSON and then it executes it and saves it. There's no reason we couldn't be peer-to-peer connected between a couple of PageNodes browsers, and every time we do something like, let's just drag this little node over here, that couldn't send a message immediately. Like, here's my current state of the thing. That would just show up on the other guy. So
never rely on the network, Louis.
It does rely on the network.
No, in reality, that's what I was joking about. It's easy to add, right? So in reality, you're going to have to do operational transforms or like CRDTs or something super sophisticated so it actually works.
Yeah, right now, in most cases, it's just clobber the other guy. Here's the latest thing.
Yeah.
That happens right now. That if I were to say open up 2 tabs with the same PageNodes.com, I've got 2 flows and they're both executing, and then I go and change something on one of those tabs, hit deploy. The other one doesn't get that immediately. If I reload the page, it gets it.
Yeah.
Or if he goes and changes the flow, that's clobbering the other one. So right now everything is last right.
There's a whole bunch of issues there. I mean, there's the technical issues of how do you keep it all synced up.
Yep.
Again, op transforms. There's another technique and algorithm that I heard about, and CRDTs, conflict resolving data types.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the UI and interactivity, the UX component of the other guy's flows. Like, are they color coded with like the borders color coded so I can see what like DC's working on, you're working on, and then does it automatically update and run the code that he changed, or do I have to then also hit run to redeploy his change stuff?
I have something selected. He just hit delete. Now what state is my application in? Right?
It gets pretty complicated.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not trivial, but it's doable for sure.
Oh yeah.
All right, so we only have a couple of minutes left in the show, and I just wanted to uh, get an opportunity for you to give everybody the URL to the project. I think it's pagenodes.com, but also the open source side of it. We have a lot of people who code, and I think a lot of them are probably interested in this. So if they want to be able to help contribute towards PageNodes, where do they go for that?
So let's go to PageNodes proper here. So this is the production site, and I have this flow right here is where is the flow that we came up with to control some robots. It's basically a couple of Bluetooth outs connected to a Bluetooth device that's similar to what I was saying about Fermata that we're sending commands. Very, very similar commands to that. And so that's what this flow is. Anyways, that's why I was just running it locally here, because I didn't want to disturb this flow, because I wanted to maybe show the bot running. But anyway, so pagenodes.com, I've got a link right here to our Twitter account. And to the repo on GitHub. So this stuff is all open source. And the code is not straightforward. I'll be honest. It's a very large code base for a web page, right? It's a web page that does a lot, but it is a web page, and this is a lot of code. You can submit issues. I've got some issues in here, and this is, I mean, still, this is. This particular project is not the bread and butter of my company. So I have not, over the year or so, sometimes it's really intense. Sometimes I have some of my employees on it. Sometimes, it's ignored for a couple of weeks at a time. So
Sure.
Apologize if I can't get to the issues immediately.
Well, maybe somebody out there has a lot of money and they'd like to sponsor you. You know what I mean?
I would not mind getting paid to work on this open source piece explicitly.
You heard it here, everyone. Corporate stewardship is definitely it's entertained.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah.
This really does look like a project that, say, IBM ought to take back into their stuff. I mean, it looks like something that could definitely benefit from a large corporation being able to give full-time development to it, because it looks like even while we're talking, the peer programming stuff and things like that, it just seems like there's a never-ending, because of it being, early tech, young tech, there's a never-ending list of features to add to this.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it is different than their existing open source project. And I mean, it looks a lot like Node-RED, and a lot of the UI was taken directly from Node-RED, but they're doing two very different things right now. And they're both flow-based programming, but one is leveraging browser tech, and one is leveraging embedded or server tech.
Right.
I think there's definitely room for both of these projects.
Awesome. Any shout outs you want to give to any other projects like yours?
Definitely Octoblue. Those guys, they're doing great work. I love the stuff that they do over there at Citrix. I love the stuff that Node-RED is doing with IBM. There's definitely Johnny 5. Even if you don't want to do anything flow based and you want to do everything just programmatically with JavaScript, Johnny 5 is totally where it's at. It's I made some things easy in PageNodes, some things easy in that Node-RED, the corollary piece to Johnny 5 for Node-RED. But you don't have to do that. If you get started, grab an Arduino, start blinking some lights on it, hooking up servos, build a robot. And that's with Johnny 5. Big open source project. In fact, let me go there. And great documentation on it.
Wow.
And every one of these things as well has got a wiring diagram. So that's how you hook up a button to an Uno. So all of, you can just do this stuff in Node. These same APIs are available in PageNodes as well. Definitely this project. I love everybody behind this thing. They're all really great people and very welcoming community as well. And also, NodeBots.io, which is Johnny 5 is the project that this thing usually uses, but there is NodeBots Day, which everybody still has a chance if they're in an area or they can get to one of the areas with, let me see here. It is Sorry. Anyways, NodeBots.io. You could find the location near you where there's going to be a NodeBots event. If you want to do JavaScript robotics, it's a great day.
Is that the event that you guys throw or you go to?
We do throw. I throw one at HeatSink Labs in downtown Mesa, which is on the east side of Phoenix.
When does that usually go on?
That's July 29th. I haven't opened up tickets for that just yet because we have another event happening before that. But
is there an email list or something that somebody can sign up to in the meantime?
I would look at the NodeBots GitHub. So it is NodeBots Day here. So this right here is depending on, because each one of these events is run by some volunteer, some organizer. Mine is the Phoenix Mesa one in Arizona, but there's other ones as well. So hopefully if one's near you and you could spend a Saturday, it's definitely worth it.
Super awesome. Yeah. And does it cost anything?
Mine does, but you're going to end up with some hardware. I think most of them do cost something. I think I charged $35 last year, and people walked away with like $80 worth of robotics because there's a couple of sponsors.
Oh wow, cool!
And that's usually the way it works out is there is some fee, but then there's also sponsors, and there's usually lunch and things like that.
That's super awesome. I hope I can make it out there at some point. My problem is I make it out to Phoenix on the days people aren't doing things, and then I just have to end up getting hot for nothing.
Yeah. Well, we're not doing. It's not. I don't pick. It's International NodeBots Day, and so I didn't pick the day. July 29th is not a day you want to be in Phoenix normally, aside from this cool event.
From what I understand, it's a that might be a day that planes can't land in Phoenix, right?
Can't take off.
Definitely
can't take off. I see.
Yeah, the air gets too thin.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually. My old black T-top Firebird that I have, I measured the dash temperature on our day where it hit like 119, and the dash temperature was 212 degrees, or excuse me, 222 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 10 degrees over the boiling point of water. So.
Yeah, people are like, oh, you could cook an egg. You're like, no, I could burn an egg on there.
Yeah, I could literally boil pasta on my dashboard in my old car. So,
yeah.
Wow. Well, Louis, thank you so much for coming by and talking to us about flow-based programming, Internet of Things, robotics, and how all that comes together. I mean, I am really inspired by this whole talk because there's just so much more that flow-based programming hasn't even had a chance to go and wow people and show them how easy it is. Things like the microservices thing. I can't imagine. Let's just put it this way. In 5 years, if that's not around, I'm going to be forced. My hand will be forced. I will have to compete, and we're going to have to work out something so we can make that happen. Because it's just that's the way I want to. I haven't. We've had a lot of guests on the show, and I haven't necessarily wanted to work in the world that they described. I want to work in this world where I'm, where I get to actually go back to being a Lego builder professionally,
Well, this stuff is definitely coming. Keep your eye on this project, but I don't want to say everything we're working on, but we are working on things very much related to what you are talking about, and it's going to be good.
That's great.
I'm really having a good time with that. So, not everything that you see in PageNodes. I'm putting out as much open source as possible, but there are a lot more things in the works that are similar to what you're speaking about. That should be a good time. That should be. I'm enjoying working on them anyways.
Awesome.
So way more to come.
Before we let you go, I want you to shut down your share screen and show everybody that cool robot that you showed because they didn't get a chance, and it's too cool not to show.
All right. Can you see my camera now?
Yep.
Okay, so this one here, I'm not sure if we're going to be building these at NodeBots Day or not. These ones are kind of expensive. Well, not really expensive. The chassis was like $70, which is a little more than I wanted to spend at NodeBots Day. But we have a little 6-wheel rover on top of this guy. Let's see, can we see here? I've got an Arduino 101. That is basically, it's like an Arduino Uno. It's a basic Arduino, except that it's using an Intel chip called a Curie, which has a Bluetooth low energy component on it. We also have a motor controller. Because we don't actually drive the wheels directly from the Arduino. We pass it through something that can give us more power for all these wheels, and that's a L298N dual H-bridge driver, and a pack of batteries. And I could probably demo this here real quick using PageNodes. Actually, you won't see the PageNodes, you'll see the robot.
Please.
That's that flow that I was showing you on PageNodes.com that I did. That is because I wanted to send signals directly to this guy. So I am going to, from my browser, make a connection. So when I hit reload, actually I might have to. Okay, here we go. So I am connected to it. And then in PageNodes, we can switch to something called IoT remote buttons, which is basically just a big button panel. So we can take in button clicks. So if I hit, oh, good. Did you see that light up? That's telling me that it's ready. And let me see here, back to PageNodes. Let's give it some speed and get the wheels running. Okay, so that single driver is basically sending all of the. Let me go back there for a second. Is sending some pretty simple commands. So let's go here. What I'm doing is I'm telling, so a dual H bridge, one of these things here, takes a couple of pins that tell it if you're sending on and off with two of the pins, turn the wheels one way. So that's one side. And then flip those pins to go the other direction. And then there's a third pin. It's called a PWM, pulse width modulation. It basically lets us send a variable amount of current, sort of, to a particular pin. So what we're doing is saying, here's the direction, here's the velocity. In the end, though, all that said, we're sending some simple commands over Bluetooth with PageNodes to drive this thing like a tank. Forward, back, left, right. And we build these types of things at NodeBots Day.
Got it.
So using JavaScript, using a browser, and doing a little robot here, or a big one in this case.
How long did it take you to build that?
So this one, my buddy Sheldon put together, but it's from a kit. So Servo City, they have these awesome kits. They're like these plastic things with the wheels. You have to supply the microcontroller and the motor driver and batteries, the rubber bands. Yeah. But it comes with basically the chassis and the motors. This one was $70, but they have others that are like $15 with two wheels.
Oh, wow.
I'm thinking I might go for the four-wheelers for I'm not sure yet for NodeBots Day, but it'll be something like this. Yeah, they're great. I've had a good time with these things here. I've got a bunch. Hold on one sec. I got one right out of reach here. Let me grab it. I'm knocking everything down. Cheaper bot, but 4 wheels, same thing. Another micro, another Bluetooth guy, and another battery pack, and this one was $28 or $29, something like that.
That's really not that expensive to get into a cool hobby.
Yeah. And so this one, I put this one together myself in about 15, 20 minutes. Although I knew how to do all the wiring and stuff, so
sure.
That would take longer. But snapping the body together was a few minutes. I think this one was half an hour maybe to put together.
Wow, that is really fast compared to the old kits.
Oh yeah, these are great. Everything snaps together. It's there's some screws to hold the motors in place and stuff like that. But
that is super awesome.
Snap together. I put video if anybody wants to see this on my Twitter account. My Twitter's Montes Elio. I don't know if you could show that somewhere. But that I've got video of this guy jumping a ramp and spinning around and stuff, and that was all done with an Android phone. I mean, because Android phones have web Bluetooth now, using Chrome on Android. So we designed the flow in browser and then exported the JSON and then imported that on the phone. It's a little bit harder to do all the dragging and dropping on a phone, but you can import some JSON, copy and paste, run that, and then the phone follow it around with your phone.
Wow.
Controlling it.
That's really cool. Well, Louis, I think that's it for our time for today.
All right.
But
Excellent.
thank you so much for coming by and teaching and showing us everything that goes into Internet of Things, flow-based programming, how to use that for robotics. Told us about your event. Before the show, we were having a hard time figuring out what to call you, and now I think we're going to have a harder time. I don't think we got that any simpler. I think technologist is a term for people like you. You know.
IT professional. Just kidding. Don't use that. Never use that, please.
Right. Flow-based programming expert, right?
There you go. That'll work.
All right. Thank you so much, Louis. We're going to let you go. And we hope that you'll come back on here anytime you have an update on some cool stuff that you got on PageNodes, anytime you got a new project or a new event. Let us know, and we'll make some time to talk to you about all that.
Excellent. All right. Thanks a lot. A lot of fun.
No problem.
All right,
Take care.
All right. You guys.
All right. So let's see how we do this now, because we had a new layout for Elio and Louis. Let me go ahead and make a mental note to make this a lot smoother. All right. Take care, Louis. All right, there he goes. All right, and then we're going to bring back Elio, and all right, I think it actually worked this time. Elio, you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
All right, cool. All right, so, wow, Elio. I was not, I mean, honestly, you know, when you just hear flow-based programming and you're one of those jerks like me who's done one single project in it, and I thought I knew a lot about it, wow, there was so much about that I didn't know, and I wasn't understanding the implications of you know what? Before we started this show, dude, I got to be honest with you. You know, I heard you said something along the lines of like programming. Visual programming's the future, and visual programming's is where everything's gonna go. And I immediately took an opposite stance in my head, where I was just like, "No, screw that. You know, I'm good at the other thing, and I'm going to promote that." This is definitely the way things are going to go. I mean, there's no other technology I know of that solves all these same problems, and it's so much more attractive to program this way.
The really long game that I like to point out to people is that programming is a limited time profession. People think of it as the job of the future, and really, if we're still programming in 50 years, we fucked up. Like, I hate to put it that bluntly, but there's no other way to put it. We hopefully will have advances in machine learning and proof systems and other technologies that are yet to be invented that you won't have to program. Programming right now, you have to excruciatingly detail all the steps and exactly how they need to happen. We barely, other than SQL, there are not too many, everything's imperative. There's not too many declarative languages where you say, computer, here's basically what I want. Figure out the best way to get it. SQL does that to some extent, but there are very few other languages that have any kind of major adoption that are declarative. And Make, goes way back. It kind of does that, not in a sophisticated way. But in the future, it should be like Star Trek, where you could just interactively have a discussion with a computer, and you could get it to do what you want without having to write all these arcane and really precise commands. Oh, I missed a comma, so nothing's working. And we spend 3 hours figuring out, oh, it's because I missed a comma.
Right.
Some stupid little thing like that.
Yep.
So it should be at the point where, so there's several other projects that I wish I had done a better job of coordinating with Louis and doing some show prep, because we talked a little bit briefly before the show, but he hadn't had time to look at it, which, again, that's on me. But we talk about, I think Luna was the one that came out. And Luna's a brand new thing it's got all the buzzwords, visual and functional. And all. So I'm hoping it's half as good as the marketing, because that would be incredible. We'll see. And then the one I've been watching for quite a while is Eve, which finally got released. So the website is witheve.com. I'll paste that into the chat here. I'll paste both of those. And Eve has been, what's his name? Chris Granger, that did Light Table, I believe, is the guy behind Eve. And the goal of Eve is to move us away from programming and toward what we're talking about, toward making it simple enough to teach the computer what we want it to do without having to do what we consider programming today. So people are already, they're already working on this. It just, we're missing the sophistication in our tooling to allow the computer to be able to help us to the degree it needs to program without programming, to be able to literally just teach a computer without any specialized knowledge like you could teach a person.
Yeah.
Someday.
Someday. There is a particular urgency to go to break real quick, so let's go ahead and do that. Everybody, we are going to play a Computer Chronicles from Stuart Chaffee and Stuart Chaffee Productions. This one is the one with the least amount of views. I sorted it backwards. I sorted it backwards, and I was like, this one only got 300 views ever. And so, well, other than the original airing. This one is cool because it's on online shopping from 1996, and it has Jeff Bezos as a guest on it. So I want to see Jeff Bezos from 1996. I want to see if he had any great predictions for the future. So we're going to go ahead and throw that up for you. And when we come back, we're going to do a little activity where we're going to create the MVP list, so the minimum viable minimum viable feature set for our new application. And we'll be doing that. And anyway, we got to get to break. So I will come back here. We'll both be back here in right after the episode. So don't go anywhere.